Welcome to Savage Minds. I'm your host, Julian Vigo. And our very special guest is Stephanie Davies-Arai, an author and communication skills trainer who has provided teacher training and worked in schools and with parents for over 20 years. She is founder and director of Transgender Trend, the leading UK organization advocating for an evidence-based approach to childhood gender nonconformity. Welcome, Stephanie, to our first show of 2021. And I'd first like for you, if you could, to explain a bit for listeners outside of the UK. Tell us about who you are and how you got involved with this argument of gender identity.
Okay, thanks, Julian. I am a communication skills trainer. So I've worked in schools with teachers and with parents for over 20 years. So I came into this by noticing how many media articles were appearing about transgender kids. And in my work, I've heard everything from parents about children. I've got 4 of my own, they're in their 20s now. And nobody was talking about it, on any sort of parenting websites. The issue of transgender kids was not mentioned. And normally in any new thing that came into education or with children would be debated, and you'd see lots of discussions about it, people challenging it or people supporting it. And on this one subject, there was nothing. And I thought at that time I was writing a weekly parenting blog, and I felt that I had a responsibility to talk about it. And then actually at that time I was also working on the No More Page 3 campaign. And for those outside the UK, the Sun newspaper used to publish a topless model on page 3 every day. And there was a campaign to ask the editors nicely to stop doing it. And it lasted about 2.5 years, and I was a prominent member of that campaign. And during that campaign, I did a lot of the radio interviews and the podcasts and the going out to universities and meeting with young women and taking part in debates and doing presentations to various groups. Because I'm self-employed, I had the time. And so I had a real hands-on experience, and I did a lot of research at that time about objectification and the effects of objectification on women and the culture that young women are growing up in, and a sort of very sexist lad culture at uni, some horrifying stories from young women. So that informed me as well. And that while I was working on that campaign, we none of us were allowed to write about any other issues, sort of contentious issues. We had to be very neutral about everything. And I think another aspect was when we were tweeting things, it would come up, or we can't retweet this event because it's women only, and that means it's trans exclusionary. And I would come in and say, well, if we're going to be absolutely neutral, we either retweet every event or none of them. Because if you're refusing to retweet this one, you are going to be excluding the most vulnerable women who want a female-only space. And so you are taking a stand. So I realised that I was the only one in the group who was coming up with and I was immediately concerned about what was happening. So that's going back to about 2013, or it was coming up then, and I was very aware. And I started researching, mostly about children because that's my area. And when we won that campaign. It was January 2015, and on my parenting blog, I published my first piece in March, which was called "Is My Child Transgender?" And that got an enormous response from parents who were very grateful to hear somebody speaking up about it, because and what I got from the parents was fear. Parents were really, really worried, but they daren't speak out because they would be accused of bigotry and transphobia if they did. So the response to that article, and I was thinking at the time, I must do something about this.
Where was this article published, can I ask?
It was on my parenting blog. So my website, stephaniedavisarai.com. And I did a section communicating with kids. I wrote a book called Communicating with Kids, and that's that's what my work is all about. How we communicate with kids, what kids understand from what we say, and kids, of course, understand things very differently to adults, and don't have the cognitive abilities to interpret and analyze as adults do. And I'm very concerned that we treat children as children. I think it's their right to be treated as children and not as mini adults, I think. And I realised that with the issue of transgender kids, they were placed outside any other understanding of children, child development, child psychology. They were somehow this magical group who were completely uninfluenced by any messages they got from the parents, from the culture. They were immune to environmental influence. They were outside their culture, a separate group. So we could not apply any normal child development ideas to these children. They existed separately, and that's a real red flag. You cannot treat children as if they are not normal children. They are. So yes, that's how I started. I thought I must, and I noticed that parents were looking online for information and finding websites like Mermaids, who would just say, your son is now your daughter. You must affirm her as a girl, which is ideology. It's not a clinical approach. It's not. And for me, as a parent, that is the most extreme thing you could possibly do to a child. A child gives you a piece of information that's not factually correct, and you tell that child you are right. Your belief is actually factual. It was an unbelievable bit of parenting advice that would not make sense in any other area. So I thought parents need a resource that put together all the evidence-based information which I've been gathering over a period of a couple of years, and so they could access facts and information rather than ideology. So that was the reason for setting up. That was the initial reason for setting up Transgender Trend. There was another reason because I noticed in the press and all these sort of happy transing kids stories that there wasn't any voice of challenge. There was nobody coming in and saying it. It was just all cheerleading. So I thought, I need to be a voice of challenge, and nobody's going to contact me. So I need to be an organisation with a website in order to be listened to. And so I launched, and I was releasing press statements right from the start, and it worked very, very quickly. So it was towards the end of 2015. I spent most of that year putting the website together. Launched it in, I think it was November. And at that stage, I think it was the same month, I'd published a piece for Wales Arts Review called The Transgender Experiment on Kids.
That's right. I remember that.
Yeah, and that also got a huge response. And that's when Fourth Wave Now in the US contacted me, because it was so rare to see any article published anywhere at that time that challenged it. She couldn't believe that she'd seen. So she was right on to me, and interviewed me, and then we became very good friends, and that's and still are. We have a great UK-US friendship across the pond.
Who was this?
This was for Denise at Fourth Wave Now.
Oh, right.
And she
yes.
started Fourth Wave Now early 2015. So she'd been going for a while, and she's the most fiercely intelligent writer. So Fourth Wave Now is an excellent website, and I really admired her. And she's been such a great support. If I'm having stuff going on, I can always pick up the phone to her, and she knows exactly what I'm talking about. So she's been such a fantastic support over the years. So anyway, that had a big impact. That article in the Wales Arts Review also had a big impact. I got a lot of messages and thanks. when I set up Transgender Trend, I got loads of comments on that first article I posted, people saying, tears of relief, thank you so much for doing this.
People, right. I remember we met around that time.
Yeah, and parents were desperate. At that time, absolutely desperate. This is going back 5 years, and
well, I had a similar experience after my first article in 2013 on this. I got waves of emails. I mean, death threats, yes. Loads of parents writing me and saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe I read your piece. This is like a fountain of information. No one else has said this, because everywhere we go, this was one parent in Ontario, Canada, everywhere we go, they're pushing us to transition our daughter. And this is not what we think is right for her. We think that this entire narrative is built on stereotypes, and it's dangerous. And we are leftists. I mean, they were saying everything that most of the feminists and now men and women who are or are not self-considered feminists are saying in the last many years. People are finding themselves being institutionally pushed towards transition by medical practitioners, psychologists, therapists, and there's very little, if any, alternative. And there was very little, if no alternative, for these parents in Canada and many parts of the US and Australia. And as you have witnessed in the UK as well. I mean, you're in you're in southeastern England. And I remember, you were doing work, campaign work, also to address issues of this imbalance of information being disseminated by, of all places, the schools. How is it that this narrative impermeated into the school system, including images like the Sam Kellerman genderbread person? This is a man who also did a sexuality tree, where number 23 of his sexuality tree, it's a big family of sexual images built upon a tree. The words and the roots each are a type of sexuality. And number 23 is rape. So this is a man who believes that rape is just another sexuality. How on earth did this person's narrative get into the Brighton and Hove system? I'm dying to know about this. I've investigated, as you know, in past years. I've spoken to you about my digging into this, and Brighton and Hove went cold on me. They wouldn't respond to press queries.
It's total policy capture, and the trans activist movement has been working for years behind the scenes in media, in government, everywhere to instigate all of this secretly, and the public haven't known anything about it, and have been very successful. And yes, you can say, what why is that? I don't know, but it's a real example of total policy capture by an ideological based special interest group. And we need to learn real lessons from this, because it's caused so much damage in society, in families with children, for women, for gay and lesbian people. So the damage is enormous, and we're seeing that being played out. When you get to the stage where we're putting rapists in women's prisons, is that not the place to stop and say, what are we doing? But yes, I think so that work was going on, and the job of all of us as sort of grassroots organisations and individuals is to get our voices heard. And of course, right from the start, women's voices haven't been included in this. Right in the UK, we had a transgender equality inquiry, and that was in 2015. And most people didn't know about it. It wasn't, all the trans activist groups knew about it, but women didn't, ordinary people didn't. I responded to it, and a few feminists and feminist groups responded to it, but very few, and no women who did respond were invited in to talk, to give oral evidence.
Who was invited?
So we had organisations like Mermaids and Gendered Intelligence going in, and the main sort of trans activists in the UK. And then they produced a report, which was really a wish list, fulfilling the wish list of the trans activist movement. And from there, awareness grew through the work of various people, mostly feminists. And it began to be challenged and it began to be more public. And so over these past 5 years, we've seen a real growth in grassroots organisations springing up, in people becoming aware, and campaigns going on to establish women's voices into the debate. Because I think the biggest impact of this is on women and children, and so it's been a lot of work by many people in the UK to raise awareness and work with the media, and I do such a lot of sort of unpaid consultancy work behind the scenes in the media. Anyone who's making a documentary, anybody who's, government policymakers, and it's a lot of work to try, because the narrative has already been established. If you challenge it, you're transphobic. And the issue of parents, my experience, and I spent a lot of time when I first set up Transgender Trend responding to distraught parents, and it's devastating. The stories, the family, families have been destroyed by this. And as you say, actually, most of the people who contact me are sort of lefty, liberal, well, we don't mind how our children express themselves. They're not sort of rigid, girls must wear pink, boys must, they're not at all. And yet they've been very, the propaganda has been from the trans activists is that the only opposition comes from the sort of far right religious. And I don't mind, I actually, I'm politically neutral. I don't mind what religion you have. I don't mind what politics you have. I'm, I draw the line at some place. But basically, I'm quite neutral. I accept people have different beliefs. So I don't, I don't condemn people who are right wing or anything.
Well, many would consider that an adult position to take, right? I mean, the purity politics has ruined a lot of our work too.
I think it's an important position, actually, and it's me, but I think it's important when you're working with children that you're not opposing something with a different ideology. I mean, even feminism, and I see myself as feminist, but my belief is you have to have feminism to balance the sort of male default. In anything you do, actually, you have to have a feminist perspective to balance it. Otherwise, you are sort of drawn to sort of a male default. So, but I try to be, when I write, it's about children. It's not about anybody, any adult ideology or any adult movement. It's about children, and that has to be pure. It has to be purely about children and child development and child psychology and all of those issues, and no adult agenda imposed onto that area.
Well, we've seen, even in the recent Owen Jones-Judith Butler interview, which I know you haven't yet seen, but oh my gosh, I was just watching it this morning. I didn't want to, but I couldn't resist. It was like a horror movie. And I'm watching him trying to wiggle us, voices of women on the left, into this conservative moniker. We are necessarily conservative, according to Owen Jones, because we see gender as a construction. It's a very interesting dance that Butler plays, trying to say that gender is masculinity and femininity, trying to draw the lines from masculinity to being a man and femininity to being a woman. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, where has she been? Because even women during the French Revolution, like Flora Tristan, have spoken out about women's role in society. Women know better than anyone else that you can wear Levi's 501s and still be female and have a baby. You can be a man pushing a pushchair down the street, or playing with your child in a park, or cooking dinner, and that does not negate the physical reality of your maleness. And I'm struck by how much of this argument has been steeped in false narratives of left versus right on both sides to a large degree, I have to say. I did a piece about the well-placed people in academia who are pushing this narrative, and I took aim at a few, Sally Hines, Davina Cooper, and I had some pushback by feminists because some of them wanted to protect Davina Cooper. And I'm thinking, but wait a sec. The issue isn't women are innocent and men are bad. As Owen Jones rightly points out to Judith Butler, some of the biggest cheerleaders for transgender identity are women. And this creates several sediments of problems for all of us fighting this kind of social insanity, because we have to first of all recognize that this is a narrative. It's a very well curated narrative. It's a very well funded narrative, but it's a narrative. And I think we need to sort of disassociate ourselves from this kind of puerile nonsense of women are innocent victims and men are evil. I mean, that's also what happened in the Judith Butler discussion. She tried to make us out as penis fearers or something, or that we have fear of penis, so that we read penis into everything. And I think that sort of cheapens what's going on here, not just for the rights of adults, but especially children, because as you pointed out earlier on, I mean, children, this is the one narrative that I've witnessed in my lifetime where whatever a child says has to be right. Anything else that would be taken up ASAP. But this is the one thing where it's like, oh, wait a sec. The child's really a girl. Let's listen to her, you know? And you wouldn't see this if a child wanted to, you know, smoke cocaine in the classroom. You wouldn't see this if a child who didn't know how to swim wanted to, you know, jump off Brighton Pier. You wouldn't see this. You'd see caretaking. You'd see getting a child out of harm's way. How is it that in England, especially, or in the UK, especially, that children have been authorized to speak for themselves on this one subject alone with authority, you know?
Part of, and I talk a lot about, because my area of expertise is parenting culture, and the parenting advice industry is massive. And I did, before I wrote my book, which was Communicating with Kids, I did a lot of research on all the parenting books. There were, I think I looked on Amazon and got to about 4,000, and I didn't read them all, but I read the synopsis, and I realized that they were heavily weighted towards a child-centered. I mean, they fall into two categories: parenting advice books. They're either child-centered, which is most of them, and then there's a pushback of sort of you know, sort of rigid discipline and those books. But there has been a huge movement, and I think it started from attachment parenting, which has its you know, has its good points. But when you bring attachment, I think what happened with attachment parenting, and I think, you know, secure attachment, that's good, but as a baby, but those principles were brought into early childhood. And what that did, I remember reading lots of attachment parenting websites and things, and when it got to sort of discipline, it was all about negotiation. I thought, well, you know, authority. Well, the issue was authority, and I was thinking, well, negotiation is not authority. You know, this is wrong, and it was all about attachment parenting is looking after the needs of the child, and if you extend that into early childhood, that becomes the child is always right. The child must be listened to, but there's a difference between listening to a child and agreeing with a child. And so I think that was the the start of this sort of very child-centered parenting movement. And what it does is it says that the child is born fully formed, the child is right, the child has a fully developed sense of self. And they don't say that sort of directly, but that's what the parenting advice is based on. And the parent's job is to, this kills me, nurture the child's self-esteem. Well, my 4 children were born with a lot more self-esteem than I have, and able to demand and scream and to get their own way. They didn't need to be they didn't need their self-esteem nurturing at all. You know, they needed guidance, and so the whole sort of parenting advice that came from that, I think, has been very damaging. I think it's left children confused, not knowing where they stand. It's treating children as adults, negotiating the rules, taking part in what really should be the parenting job. And that's too much for a child who therefore is always pushing to find where the boundary is, wasting an awful lot of energy when they should be playing and learning and being a child. And I noticed that, so where I live down in the southeast of England, it's very, very sort of child-centred kind of parenting culture down here. And I noticed that those children who were not given the boundaries were anxious, nervous, and not happy children. They weren't confident children. And children do need adults to be adults and know what the adult role is, and to free them to be children. But you can see where this ties in with the transgender child. Now, when my kids were little, I don't know if this was just a UK thing, but we had there was a phase where everybody who had a special child, their child was an indigo child. Have you heard of that? Google it, indigo child. And this was going on for a few years. Those parents would say things like, "My child was born with an old soul," and making claims about, of course, every child is special. We all think ours are more special than anybody else's, but there were sort of various categories. So indigo children went probably about a decade ago, and they were especially spiritual children who had a purple aura around them or something. I can't remember, but okay. So to me, the trans child is the next indigo child, the child who is outside all of our not a human being, even just outside all our normal understanding of children, and again, that's when I was very. I find it a real red flag when you put children into an sort of adult understanding for the adults ego, or it's so harmful for that child. A child has the right to be allowed just to be an ordinary child, no matter how special they are.
It also puts a type of expectation on a child. Often I viewed this even with the parents of so-called transgender kids. They're looking for themselves affirmation, using their children as a vehicle to their affirmation. What are the goals of my child? Well, that will be a reflection of how good a parent I am. If I accept that my daughter is really a boy, then I'm progressive.
Yeah, and this has to be taken into account. This really, because it's a real thing, and anybody who's a parent knows that we want our child to be special. We want our child to be seen as special. It does bolster our ego. It does, and we have to be very careful about that, because our children are not vehicles for our own egos, and so we have to. We have to temper that, don't we? And try and keep that down a bit. But it's a sort of a kind of natural human thing. It's understandable. It's not evil, but we have to take it into account. And I noticed, and I worked in a school for I think 8 years, and in various different roles, and I worked a lot with parents, and I worked a lot with children and teachers, and I the parents who wanted this sort of special child would sort of march into the school and want the whole curriculum changed just for their child, and they were very, very sort of almost obsessive about their own child, particularly if it was an only child, actually. And the harm, the harm to the child given the power. This really is shown by transgender kids. If you are transgender, you're immediately seen as, one, the biggest victim, and two, you've got the biggest power of any child in the school. You can change all the school policies. Parents are allowed, in this one particular case, to their child will change all the school policies because they're transgender, and that's never happened before. we'd get parents coming into school saying, well, I want the curriculum to be this because my child doesn't like this. And it would have to be patiently explained to them that their child would have to put up with things they didn't like as much as things they did like, just as every other child. And it's not healthy for one child to have everything their own way. It will not do them good. It's not a good. So that had to be sort of patiently explained to some parents. But in this particular case, it's not just, yes, you have everything you want because your child is transgender. It's a perfect sort of vehicle for those parents who kind of want that power themselves or want that power for their child. And what happens inevitably with the transgender child is the parents become transgender activists on behalf of their child and advocates for the whole transgender community. And then the child also, I mean, you see children as they grow up, they're very much used, transgender kids, in the media. They get to appear on programs on TV. They get to speak. They are given a sort of celebrity status, and within the schools. I mean, schools were putting on assemblies for them and baking them cakes. And so they're given this attention that to me is not healthy for one child to have, and particularly for a reason that's based on a lie, on a myth. And the more you convince that child that they are the other sex and that they have a very special status because of that, the influence on that child is the most extreme influence you could possibly think of. I mean, normally we try with children to stand back, to not label them, to allow them a freedom to grow in the way that they need to grow, not put too much, really allow them to flower without trying to sort of channel them one way or the other too much. And yet in this one particular case, we are reinforcing every single day to a little boy that he's really a girl. So we're getting all his peer group to do it. We're getting all his teachers, all the trusted adults in his life who he trusts. And this is such a massive betrayal of trust, such a massive betrayal for children. So we're doing the most extreme influence to try to keep him convinced that he's a girl. Why would you do that? Why would you do that to a child? Why not? I mean, the established clinical approach is called watchful waiting, because we know that most children will grow out of that. We know that the majority will become gay or lesbian, particularly gay boys. To talk about prepubertal children. With prepubertal girls, it's about 50-50, I think. It's not so, because so many girls are so-called tomboys, but this attempt to reinforce that child's belief, which is a false belief, is just unheard of in any sort of parenting manual. You would never ever do that in any other circumstances.
Well, also the fact that schools become so enmeshed in propagating this narrative is also something of concern to me. I mean, in a parallel track, one day I was picking up my child from her nursery in Islington. It was a grammar school with a nursery. And when I picked her up, the teacher handed me a paper. I read it, and it was about parents being invited to attend a job center training workshop. Now, immediately, this struck me as really troubling. I first thought, why are public schools in London, much less anywhere in the UK, giving out flyers about a local lawyer giving training to parents about the job center? One. And why are schools being involved with the potential joblessness or not of parents? I mean, shouldn't school be about learning? And that clued me in that there were people being allowed access into schools, in at least this one school in Islington, without any kind of oversight. Because to me, that's a very strange blurring of private industry, even if that lawyer was doing it pro bono, which I imagine he was. I tried to find out after I called his office. But there's this strange conflation of private industry or private interests and narratives in what should be a narrative-free sector. I mean, shouldn't education be about that? Instead, what we've seen in the UK, Canada, and other countries is that now gender is part of an orthodoxy. It's even part of the school curriculum in some areas, and it's being imposed. And I wondered if you could speak to what you found back in 2015 when you got involved. What did you find on the horizon, even in the Brighton Hove area?
Well, I think what happened is the ideology sort of permeated through all the background activism. And what they did quite cleverly was to introduce this subject through an anti-bullying agenda into schools. And so that's a sort of established thing. Yes, we want to prevent bullying. So this is sort of LGBT, and it started off as LGB anti-bullying programs. Giles wrote an anti-bullying piece for which was published by the Home Office, and I think that was it was very early on, 2012 or something like that. Giles were in there very, very early in the UK. They're the Gender Identity Research and Education Society, basically a couple who've got a transsexual grown-up daughter, and so they were very, very influential. So the Home Office was publishing this, and that's how I think that this subject was introduced into schools, and it looks quite benign, doesn't it? You know, anti-bullying is, of course, we want to protect children. And the other thing I think was the word transgender. So you actually in UK law, we've got the Gender Recognition Act of 2004, which protects transsexuals, defined as transsexuals. We have got in our Equality Act 2010, we've got protected characteristic gender reassignment, which protects transsexuals. So the law protects transsexuals. Nowhere in the law is transgender protected or recognised or described as a category. So the change of that word from transsexual to transgender allowed its introduction into schools, because you cannot appear at the school gates and say, here's my 9-year-old transsexual daughter. But you can say, here's my transgender kid. So gender comes in to primary schools, to early years, because it's not sex. And sex and sexual orientation sort of subjects don't appear until sort of late primary, secondary. So you get gender in before sex, and you invent this category called gender identity and say it's exactly the same as sexual orientation. It's a thing, we all have it. There's no scientific basis to that at all. When you say a child has a gender identity that doesn't match the gender or sex they were assigned at birth, what that means is you've got a boy who thinks he's a girl. You know, in plain language, this is a boy who thinks or believes he's a girl. But they put it into this language, and they have used this idea of gender identity, which does, there's no evidence that human beings are born into the world with an innate pre-existing in the womb sense of being male or female, and that sense is completely independent of their biological sex and their socialization as boys or girls, because we remember that trans kids are outside their culture, no cultural influence on them at all.
Well,
They're
of
sort of
course, and
magical group.
And a footnote also would be to point out that even before this became such a trend, and it is, go back to the 70s and 80s. I mean, I can't remember one rock star of any sort, even down to, more marginal and new wave like Cocteau Twins. What one person looked like a quote unquote, 1950s man or woman. And this narrative that gyres and then their cohorts with gendered intelligence and mermaids, etc. This was all based on a very outdated mode of what gender means, because I did have to wonder if anyone lived through the 1970s and 80s who wrote some of the stuff, including the toolkit that gyres made was funded by the Home Office. So then you have to wonder, are people in government skipping out on history?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when I was growing up, it was punk and then new wave, and that punk saved me because I was very non-conforming and outside the group, and punk gave me a very safe way of being a rebel and wearing what I wanted and not having to look pretty. It was fantastic. And then it was the new romantics and men were wearing makeup, and I wonder whether there's been a backlash to all that because now the culture that my kids grew up, I mean, they're all in their 20s now, but while they were growing up, the culture became more and more extreme gender stereotypes, and it did in early childhood. So the marketing to children is all pink and blue, even Lego, everything became. And I wonder why there was no regulation in childhood marketing and toys, clothes, books, shoes, everything. Established the pink girls and the blue boys. So, but in then sort of teenage and adolescent culture, I look at girls now and I think, gosh, you've got nowhere to go because you've got your sort of role model pop stars are all sort of pornified, and of course we have to look at porn culture and how porn culture has infiltrated the music industry, the film industry, TV, everywhere, and youth culture. So girls are faced now with not only online porn, but the whole culture of really insane standards of sexiness and beauty, and girls have to be groomed to the nth degree just to be able to leave the house and be acceptable. And when I was growing up, I think I occasionally shaved my legs, but and tried out a bit of blue eyeshadow, but it was looking back, we had such freedom compared to girls now, and I noticed that you don't get every girl is made up, foundation on her face, heavily made up, long hair, trying to emulate the sort of Instagram stars and the social media as well, and all of that pressure of celebrities and programs. We've got a program in the UK. I've got what's it called? I can't remember. I watched half an episode once. It was, but it actually the same thing is happening to boys, and then you look at the six pack and the beach bodies so there's much more pressure and objectification of the male body now. I mean, it's still not comparable to girls because boys still have a range of role models that they can see in the media and see themselves, and girls have a very narrow range now. But a young girl growing up now, who are her role models? Who are the women that will, where's the Annie Lennox? Where's the, where are the I mean, they do exist actually, but you have to sort of find them out in popular youth culture. It's just extreme stereotypes, and then you get gaming culture where you get the female heroes always have massive breasts spilling out, and the male characters have massive huge biceps and six packs. So we've gone to a real extreme of what men and women are, and we've also, these kids have been brought up in a virtual reality culture. They spend such a long time online, and they can have their avatar. They can be whoever they want online. They can be a man, a woman, a creature. And I do think that's had an impact where where's the distinction between reality and fantasy when you're spending so much time in that world of virtual reality. I think an awful lot of things have come together to create what's happening now for young people. But what in schools, we used to have our alternative cultures. So we had punk, we had our goths, we had the geeky kids who we had our emos. We had a lot of sort of subcultures where all the kids who didn't fit in, who weren't conventional, could go and find their group and feel, dress the same, have all the, like the same music, enjoy all the same things, follow the same rules, which is what teenagers' job is, to find their tribe, identify with their tribe, and then develop their individual identity from that. Parents talk a lot about the dangers of peer pressure, but actually it's a necessary part of that identity development during the adolescent years. It's nothing wrong with it. So we had a lot of scope when I was growing up for finding our subculture and joining it and feeling okay and accepted, which is what every teenager, it's the most important thing for a teenager, to feel accepted in the group. Now, the only subculture is trans, or you have to have a gender identity, you have to be trans or non-binary or transmasculine. And then this is extending into sexualities as well. And what I've noticed happening is the same as with gender. Sexuality is now on a spectrum. Of course, we can't tell who's gay or lesbian. We can't say who's same-sex attracted anymore because sex is being erased. But I've noticed this agender coming up, and it seems to me to be like or asexual takes the place in terms of sexuality as non-binary does, and it's sort of this range of sexualities, and there's no distinction between same-sex attracted and opposite sex attracted anymore. We're all on this sort of spectrum.
And it's also incoherent too, because the asexual sexuality cracks me up when you see them on Facebook or Twitter trying to explain themselves. It's like, wait a sec, you're describing an sexuality, not asexuality. Wouldn't asexuality be silence?
I'm so suspicious about this, because kids who have been on puberty blockers and then cross-sex hormones are sterilized, and they have their sexual function perhaps destroyed. We don't quite know whether how much, but it's almost like we're saying, well, being non-sexual, having no interest in sex is normal. We're already sort of putting that in place, that we're not harming these kids because some kids are naturally asexual. I'm really suspicious about how this is being pushed. But anyway, you've got this, so all the kids have to be pansexual, transmasculine, and that is the, all the geeky kids are going into that group, all the kids who have been bullied, all the kids who are vulnerable. That's the only subculture they can now find. Where is any other subculture that doesn't involve trans? The gaming community, the anime, it's all wrapped up in trans and identity politics. So where do these kids go? That they've either got that, or they've got for girls it's like heavily made up, make yourself into a Barbie doll, and there's nothing in between, and that reflects the childhood culture and the extreme gendered stereotypes of childhood culture, which children have already been sort of conditioned into throughout their childhood in the most impressionable years. So it's already sort of normalized throughout their childhoods. And to me, as somebody who understands the power of messages to children, visual messages and messages from the culture, and you go into a toy shop and this is a row of pink and it says 4 girls, and this is a row of blue toys and it says 4 boys. But when my kids were little, there were good toy shops that didn't push, most sort of good toy shops didn't push, dolls for girls. I don't, it's fine if girls play with dolls, it's fine. I'm, but I remember getting catalogues through the door from really cheap toy shops, and all the pages were full of really pink, garish sort of plastic things for girls, domestic appliances and dolls, and that sort of thing. And the boys' pages were all black, actually, black guns and black robots. It was a bit of blue, but actually mostly black. And I used to look at these catalogues with sort of horror, thinking, who's going to buy these toys for their kids? And then that that became widespread. The good, even places like the Early Learning Centre, where you'd expect to get, dinosaurs are for everybody, science kits are for everybody. Even the sort of, and clothing and shoes, the high street shops, Clark's was promoting flimsy sandals for girls to look good on the beach and robust trainers for boys to climb rocks, literally. And this is a family store, somewhere like British Home Stores, real family sort of traditional British high street store. My daughter could not find a swimming costume when she was about 9 or 10 that was not glamorous or sexy. We had to go online to get her a sort of sports costume. So the what we have done to children, I think, over certainly the last decade, has been the most gross irresponsibility. And I I'm not a big one for conspiracy theories. I think it was marketing and making money really at the root of that, from the toy industry and the clothes industry. But why was there no regulation? Because we do talk about gender stereotypes in adult advertising. We have the Advertising Standards Authority, and we have rules, but we haven't put them in place for children, and they are the most important demographic to get right. So we've caused so much damage, I think, and there's an awful lot to undo. And I think we're seeing it being undone. We've got campaigns like "Let Toys Be Toys," let clothes be clothes, and again, lots of women setting up alternative grassroots organizations and working so hard to challenge this, and some fantastic sort of new toys being produced actually, but it's been a real battle because it's been such an onslaught, and it does feel to me like a backlash against the more the freer kind of loosening up of those sort of rigid categories and distinctions that we had during the 70s and 80s were good for that. They were,
well, absolutely. And we saw that there was no link between femininity, masculinity, and being a female or a male, or being a girl or a boy, a man or a woman, what have you. And somehow this became recodified, and swiftly and firmly. And so I'm wondering, you mentioned, let clothes be clothes, let toys be toys. There's many other groups out there that have formed since I got involved in this. Your group, Transgender Trend, has had a task to make an alternative school guidance, which challenged a lot of the nonsense being codified within the school system. Can you explain what your alternative school guidance is and what it was effectively combating within the school systems?
Mm-hmm. So this was because my work is in health, education, and the legislation sort of applying to those areas. But I focused on schools in what I've produced, because I know that if you want to challenge anything and the existing guidance in schools, you need an alternative. Parents cannot challenge if that's the only material out there, or versions of the same material. And it was my biggest aim right from the start, really. Well, I had a lot of aims, but that was one of the priorities, to get an alternative guide into schools, to arm parents to be able to say, I don't agree with this guidance you're following, have a look at this one. And so I made the guide, and it's based on my work. It's based on my understanding of communication and communication with children, and my understanding of safeguarding, which is, I'm trained. I know what safeguarding is, and I could see that these kids were being placed outside safeguarding, completely outside any sort of safeguarding protocols in schools. So I produced a guide that was really centered on safeguarding and language, and clear language, and clear language on the difference between sex and gender, because those two terms have been conflated and used to mean the same thing. The sort of claims like using separate toilets is reinforcing gender stereotypes. It's just like, no, it's for privacy. So I did a section on the areas in school where it's important to consider sex, and then the areas where you consider gender, and think about how to sort of not reinforce gender stereotypes in the curriculum or in subject areas, or what kids wear, or those sorts of areas. But then, where is sex important? Well, toilets, changing rooms, certain parts of the curriculum, sort of sex education, and be really clear about the difference between those two terms. And then I put in a legal section. So I had 2 lawyers helping me with the legal section. I had a wonderful teacher who I'd love to credit, but I can't. She's anonymous, who I ran everything past her, and to make sure that it was understandable for teachers. It was sort of teacher speak in a way, so that teachers would and she was brilliant. She gave me so much help, and also a safeguarding lead, just to check that everything I was writing was sort of compatible with safeguarding. So I had some really good expert help with it, and it's called Supporting Gender Diverse and Trans Identified Children in Schools. It also has an evidence section that gives, I think teachers need the background information of facts as much as parents do, because if you're going to understand why you're putting policies in place, you need to know, what is the clinical approach, what are the facts, and what are we doing so that we do no harm to these children. And so information is really, factual information is really important. So that's in there. And it drills down into quite some details, actually. If a child says something, how do I respond? Because these are difficult areas, and there's a lot of sensitivity in these areas. But you have to consider that if you're telling children this male child is a girl, what are the impacts going to be on other children who suddenly have these are particularly in primary years, when children are still learning the difference between fantasy and reality, and they still think that if you put a dress on a boy doll, it makes him into a girl. How are we impacting children's development if we're telling them that this male child is actually a girl? And how are we because once you redefine one child, you redefine every other child. And so you're saying a boy is a girl, suddenly you've redefined all the girls in the school, and what you take away from the girls is their stable reality, their stable understanding. They don't have to question if they're girls or not. They've never had to question this before. And suddenly you're saying that your female biology does not automatically make you a girl. This classmate who's male is also a girl. So what is the secret of being a girl now? Because it seems to be a girl, you have this magical ingredient that makes you a girl. Do I have it? Am I a girl? And suddenly the reality of your, what was or was hopefully developing into a stable reality about yourself and your body, and the most fundamental reality about yourself has been, it's like the rug has been pulled out from under you. You no longer have that certainty. So that I think I'm very, very concerned about the psychological sort of impact of child development and the harms caused to other children by that first lie that a boy is actually a girl. But for the child himself, I think it's still mostly boys in the younger years, because girls still can get away with being a tomboy, although it really worries me that I hear people saying now about a girl who has short hair and loves football, maybe she's transgender. People are being very helpful in suggesting this, rather than she's a tomboy, or even she's a girl who's got her own interests. So that does worry me, and I think the number of younger girls is increasing, but I think it's still mostly boys at that age, and these boys that we know are most likely to grow up to be gay. So you've got for that child, this usually comes from the parents, because no child understands that, and no child understands what you're saying when the child is not thinking, yes, I've got a gender identity, and I have a human right to have that affirmed. And the child is thinking, mum says I'm a girl, my teachers all say I'm a girl, everybody says I'm a girl. That's the child's world. And for that child, you are reinforcing every day of his life, in all his social life and his social interactions, this false disassociation from his body, that he is a girl in his head, and his sense of reality becomes more and more strange as he moves towards puberty, that he's a girl. And so when he hits puberty and reality hits, he is shocked, and he has this huge reality check, but nobody's going to be real with him. And that's where puberty blockers come in, and puberty blockers are absolutely essential for this child now, because where do you go? It's like all the adults have lied to me. I'm actually developing as a boy, and you've told me I'm a girl, and look, all the girls are developing differently.
Well, this also sets out a very dangerous paradigm where all the advances of not just feminism, because I always argue that feminism is good for both men and women, both girls and boys, but all the advances that have told us, especially in the 70s, Marlo Thomas in the US, the daughter of Hollywood actor Danny Thomas, came out with Free to Be You and Me. She had enormous input from people like Alan Alda, Gloria Steinem, to put out a disc, a record about how children can dress how they want and still be themselves. There was a type of, there is no female or male clothing. There is no girl or boy clothing. All of this has been undone in a very short time due to this lobby. It was put into place in schools around mostly the English speaking world in certain places, not all. And then the message that kids are getting is that, especially girls now, we're being told once again that there's a way to be a girl. There's a right way to be a woman, instead of, well, what would be more gender, critical or more progressive, as they like to think of themselves as progressive, but in fact, they're pushing the very regressive notion that clothes make the person into a man or a woman or a girl or a boy.
Mm-hmm.
And this has really been pushed as a lie in all aspects, from academia. And we see, what not just Judith Butler, but contemporary academics in the UK are putting out there as gender identity. Again, no basis. Sally Hines has loads of papers, but they have absolutely no basis in reality in terms of anything that would be found to be a social real. So where did we go that now wearing a dress means a boy is a girl? Like, how on earth has this become embraced by schools? And then forcing you, of course, to make your alternative school guidance to combat this. I mean, what insanity, what fresh hell is this, that now we're having to tell children, no, you can wear a dress, but you're still a boy.
The only message we should be giving to children is you can wear what you like. It doesn't change anything. You be you be you. And the transgender message, of course, is the opposite of that. But the other thing is, I don't know if you read the Denton's report, which details a sort of how to make your movement successful and work behind the scenes, do it secretly, all of that. And part of that was tie your campaign to a more popular campaign. So trans was tied to gay rights, and I think we've still got a bit of collective guilt about we didn't get that right quickly enough. So we just accepted trans added to it. The other thing, and bringing it into schools under the guise of anti-bullying, the other thing that it's brought into schools under the banner of is challenging gender stereotypes. Now, schools have done great work. Any school worth its salt would have actually done this work on gender stereotyping and how harmful it is. And the NEU, which is, or was the NEU, no, it was the NUT, it's the NEU now, it's the biggest teaching union in the UK, brought out a really good sort of report and about gender stereotypes. So we were on that, and then this has been slipped in, where if you're challenging gender stereotypes, you introduce the subject of gender identity, as if the only way to challenge gender stereotypes is to change your gender identity, which of course is only reinforcing gender stereotypes. And again, it's where the language and is so clever, because if you have to think very closely, really, you don't have to think about it to realize what's going on. So schools, what happened? So I think it's come in without awareness, really, in terms of schools being sort of swallowing the message. You know, I mean, teachers are very busy. Teachers have all sorts of things to deal with, and if they're told, well, you know, children are transgender and they need protecting and they need, you know, anti-bullying measures, and you know, teachers don't have much time. They're so I think it's sort of come in with a lack of attention. Although I do think there's been a huge abnegation of responsibility here. That it's so illogical and wrong and a lie that somebody should have noticed. But you know, the teaching union has its own transgender guidance, which is going along with it all. I mean, you know, it's everywhere. All the local authorities using this awful guidance. The reason that producing the alternative guide, one reason. I mean, it took me a year at least to do that. It was a hell of a lot of work, and then getting it designed up, the reason I got it out when I did was that the Equality and Human Rights Commission in the UK had promised to produce its own national guidance because local authorities were following guidance from individual groups, mostly all sorts, based in Brighton, and that guidance has gone all over England and Wales, except Cornwall, who've got their own, but it's everywhere, and it's the really, really extreme guidance. And so I noted, well, the Equality and Human Rights Commission had got, I think, Stonewall, Gendered Intelligence, Mermaids, Gyres, all the trans activist groups together around a table to discuss the national schools guidance. And I thought the national schools guidance is it. That's the one I want to challenge. So I contacted the Equality and Human Rights Commission and asked to be a stakeholder because they had nobody on the other side to balance the trans activists and think about other children's rights, particularly girls' rights. And so I went in and had a meeting, and I took along some parents and a professional, and we had a meeting which wasn't minuted, and I asked a lot of questions, and I was told, you know, there was one part of their existing guidance. So they had some technical guidance at that time, which they were going to update, but there was one piece of the technical, in fact, their technical guidance was good in one way, toilets. It didn't say that the transgender child had a right to use the toilets that matched their gender identity. So the transgender child should be found alternative facilities. So that was good. But the one piece that really bothered me was that it would be if a girl said she was a boy, it would be indirect discrimination to not use her preferred name, didn't mention pronouns, but her preferred name, and to treat her as a boy. And I asked about that at the meeting, and I said, this is really, this promotes an affirmation approach in schools, and that is an activist approach. It's not a clinically based, evidence-based approach. And really, you know, can you change that technical guidance? And she said, no, we can't change any of the technical guidance that's already there. And I said, well, you need to mitigate it. You need to add something to it then to give, you know, a range of you know, and provide some information for teachers. And then I wrote a briefing for the Equality and Human Rights Commission on the issues that concerned me from sex-based rights, from safeguarding privacy, gender stereotype reinforcement, etc., and sent that to them. And that was at the end of, let's see, 2017. I met with them, I think it was in the November. Now, at that stage, they were due to publish their national guidance. And the other reason I wanted to be a stakeholder was that I would be sent an advanced draft to check and feedback on before they published it. So they were due to publish their national guidance in March 2018. And I worked like mad over that whole Christmas period as well to get the I think I was probably at the sort of design and editing and checking little details stage. It was all the technical stuff. But I just worked 24/7 on that because I wanted to get it out before the national guidance was published in March. I wanted to put a spanner in the works. And how it happened was that I wanted to publish it in January, didn't get it ready. Finally, it was like the February half term week. I thought, it's ready to go. I'll put it out. But, mums, they'll all be on holiday. It won't go anywhere. Nobody will notice it. It's half term. People will be away. And I think when I published it, that did happen, actually. There was a bit of a silence. And then all hell broke loose on Twitter, on social media. We faced this massive onslaught, this attack from Stonewall, from all of the groups. I think they were absolutely outraged that somebody else had produced some schools guidance. And I thought, well, you can produce schools guidance. You're an organisation. You can produce schools. I'm an organisation. I can do the same. And actually, Stonewall put out a statement calling it deeply damaging. Mermaids put out a statement with MESMAC, which is this awful group in Yorkshire, and I did collate, people say ban it, burn it, shred it. Stonewall Scotland, they put out those tweets, and it was, it's extraordinary. And Stonewall does a huge favour. I mean, I did write to them and ask for a right of reply or to take it down, and they didn't reply. But Stonewall did us an enormous favour because it was in Schools Week, it was in the Times Educational Supplement, I don't know, but it was all over the media. So Stonewall did a brilliant job for us in promoting that schools guidance and getting it out there to more parents, but it also created a sort of media storm which the Equality and Human Rights Commission could not ignore, because there was a lot of support for it, of course, as well. And people saying, oh, this is really sensible, it protects the rights of children who identify as transgender, it protects non-conforming children, it protects gay and lesbian and autistic children. It's a really good, I'm very proud of it. And it was very welcome. So it flew off the shelves. I think, the downloads went mad. And then we crowdfunded it to have it printed in, I think it was the June that year or something, and they got the crowdfunders shut down, the activists.
This was June of 2018?
2018. So the activists got the crowdfunders shut down because they said it contained hate. And this was such a stressful, it was 6 days that crowdfunded was done. It was so stressful because I was on the phone to crowdfunder all the time, and they were very nice. They were very, very good, actually. I sensed that they were just going to take it down before they spoke to me, and then realised that I was okay. I think they were sort of going to cave. Actually. But anyway, we had quite a few conversations, and they got their legal team onto it, and so they obviously checked through all the legal section. And because I think Stonewall had always, I think everybody had accused us of being in breach of the Equality Act as well. Well, we hadn't actually given really much advice on. We just laid out what the law, what legislation said. We didn't, but yeah, after 6 days, then Crowdfunder announced that they couldn't find any hate. And they reinstated us and offered us an extra week. And I said no, because I was so exhausted by that point. I just get it over with. But then we printed it, and that's gone out. It's over 1,500 have gone out to schools, and we've had such fantastic feedback. We know local authority areas are using it. We know schools have benefited from it. I've had phone calls from teachers and asking for sort of further advice. And I of course, all of this is confidential. I would never name a school or a local authority area that was using it, but it's had and then I was shortlisted for the John Maddox Prize for that guide, which is a science prize. And
that's right, I remember.
That was real validation and sort of indication. But I think it had a huge impact on the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who still not published the national guidance. So I think it started a real, and sort of, they couldn't avoid the subject that there was a challenge to what was going out. Now, what happened then, and I have continued to be in contact with the Equality and Human Rights Commission ever since. I've sent them feedback from parents whose schools are using one of the transgender toolkits, and I've reported back and saying, well, these parents are saying this, and and I've pushed them to do an open consultation where parents were involved and said, that this issue affects every single child in every single school and every single parent, and you're not giving them a voice in what the guidance will be. And they've resisted that, and they haven't really responded to me, but I've kept up the pressure. I sent them the schools guide, and then since then we produced a guide on safeguarding. We produced a children's rights impact assessment on the All Sorts Trans toolkit, and we've produced a guide on inclusive relationships and sex education. I've sent them all to the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Just kept up the pressure, so that and as the movement has built and more campaign groups have built up, that pressure has increased. So the guidance is still not out, but they did send out a draft copy to stakeholders. So when that was over a year ago, and it was awful. And they had changed the technical guidance about toilets, and they promised me that they could not change the existing technical guidance that they put out, but they changed it on toilets to a child must be able to use the toilet that matches their gender identity. And they had not changed the technical guidance that I wanted changed, which was promoting affirmation and social transition in schools. Totally no evidence base to support that approach.
But as we learned from recent discussions around the Equalities Act, this is an incorrect interpretation, is it not?
Yes, it is. I mean, and there is a challenge to the EHRC going on now, but since they published the draft version, I responded to it, and mostly, actually, I responded in terms of flaws in process, that it wasn't a democratic process that had led to this document, and it was have they done it? But they then that was over a year ago, and then they were supposed to publish again in September this year, and I think COVID has got in the way, etc. But I feel very I think that the transgender trans schools guidance had a huge impact on that process of the national schools guidance, because I thought once the national guidance is published by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, that's game over, or not game over. I had plans to deal with that, but it would mean such a lot of work to undo that once that was out. My biggest aim was to prevent that coming out. I think I succeeded.
You're listening to Savage Minds. We hope you're enjoying the show. Please consider subscribing. We depend on listeners and readers just like you. Now, back to our show. The recent Kira Bell case has been another nail in the coffin of this ideology, which, I mean, it was you, I remember I was writing a piece about the effects of puberty blockers like Lupron, and you were the person who pointed out the study that was taken out on sheep, because believe it or not, humans have not been properly studied, or human children, for obvious ethical concerns on this very subject. And we know that there are detrimental repercussions for the use of puberty blockers on sheep, and not least of which is physical development of bones and organs, but also then the whole psychological element obviously cannot be studied through sheep. We are not even allowed to discuss. And I think Kira Bell's victory, along with the mother of the other trans-identified child, that their win means something for the larger picture, even outside of the UK. How do you see this case being the springboard for a very likely revolution against gender ideology?
It changes everything. I think people don't realise the central part that puberty blockers play in the transition of children. To me, puberty blockers create affirmation and social transition of young children. So without puberty blockers, that child gets to puberty and everything. Now, one of the things that the school's guidance always suggests is that a child transitions between primary and secondary school, and they can start secondary school sort of without their trans history. In other words, they can start secondary school in stealth. And if you look at how, the BBC has promoted now two sort of fictional dramas about a child doing just that. One's an Australian drama. It came out, I think, last year, First Day. And the other one was a sort of online diary kind of a fictional account. Both were trans girls, so boys who were stealth transitioning as they started secondary school. And both programs are built on typical childhood themes and worries about starting secondary school, not fitting in, not making any friends, all of those things that will hook children in. And this is a strategy of propaganda. It's like get children in through those sort of things that they will relate to, and actually you're whacking them with a real political message, and the political message is trans women are women. That's it. It's a political message. And so both of those dramas were promoted on CBBC, and in the school's guidance, that's always a suggestion. You might want to do this. Now, without puberty blockers, you can't. You've got and watching the drama First Day, you've got this actually a 14-year-old trans star in Australia. One of the trans poster childs is playing the part of Hannah in this drama, and is a 12-year-old in the drama, but in real life is 14, and that child has to be on puberty blockers because that child looks like a girl child. And one of the things is that in primary school you can sort of get away with it because boys look like girls look like boys, you can't tell the difference. When they hit puberty, it's fine to, in the case of in UK schools, you've got a situation where a child is on puberty blockers, a child is male, going in to use the girls' toilets and changing rooms without the girls' knowledge or consent. So that's violation of girls' boundaries without them knowing about it, although they probably do, but nobody's saying it. And so that's a huge violation and deception. But you can, and the All Sorts Schools Toolkit says that if a parent complains and says my daughter feels uncomfortable getting changed in front of a boy, that the parents and the girl must be told that he was assigned male at birth, but is in every other respect a girl. So they are. That's the answer to that one. So they must accept that this child with a penis is literally a girl. Trans women are women. So that, you can sort of still see that if this child looks like a child and looks quite feminine, as boys do. Now, imagine that situation where you've got a hulking great 6'3", broad-shouldered, drop voice, Adam's apple kid, teenage boy, and you're saying he may have been assigned male at birth, but in all other respects, he's a girl. And the parents are going to go, mate,
Well, it's also important for people listening to understand that this is a longer story that even goes back to Toronto and Kenneth Zucker. Remember how he was practically frog marched out of his place of employment at KMH in Toronto for having discussed desistance. And desistance, he was able to show, scientifically speaking, through a study, that desistance is very much linked to has the child commenced or not with puberty blockers. And that proved to be quite a revolutionary statement to make, although that statement was made on the roots of investigation, scientific investigation within the KMH itself. He was fired He later won a lawsuit against them. We've seen many times, even over the past year, where false statements about gender, puberty blockers, and desistance have been made, even in peer-reviewed journals. The lie has been allowed to be repeated. So you're dealing with parents and school boards and government institutions that are all battling the whirlwinds of various lies being forcefully put out there to confuse us all.
And it starts with affirmation. So you, every stage of this for children, and it really bothers, you know, these activist groups that campaign say, you know, a man with a penis is a woman. He doesn't have to take hormones, doesn't have to do anything. He's a woman if he identifies as such. Whereas with children, it's like medical intervention at earlier ages as possible. And this is why the Tavistock started their puberty blocker trial, because of the pressure from groups like mermaids and parents associated with mermaids and gyres and so you start with affirmation. Every single stage creates the next one. Affirmation and social transition, you make it as difficult as possible, as you possibly can, for that child to outgrow that gender dysphoria. You're trying to keep them trans. And then you get to puberty, you need those puberty blockers. If you're going to go in stealth in your secondary school, or you're going to, and the whole premise that puberty blockers is based on is a false premise. Children do not need time. We do not need to buy time for children to decide whether they are a girl or a boy. That was decided at birth. You know, that's not a choice you have. That's the whole false premise that they're built on. Anyway, so you need puberty blockers, and of course then we know that puberty blockers almost 100% go on to cross-sex hormones at age 16. They're then, you know, if they've had puberty blockers at kind of stage 2, and they're sterilized, so you lose sexual function the whole of their adult life, and you know, sexual and romantic relationships are harmfully impacted in ways that children cannot possibly understand, because they're not at the life stage where those things are important yet or mean anything to them, which is the whole issue of informed consent that came up in the Kirabel case. So this puberty blockers for the transitioning of children are absolutely central. Now, once you've got rid of puberty blockers, the whole house of cards falls down. So it's that big. It's that big. They hold such a central position in the whole transitioning of children issue. So I think it will have a global impact. It has to, and that everything now must be questioned, because it's a kind of cruelty to tell a child that he's a girl or his childhood, and then he starts developing into a man. The psychological and mental health issues. I mean, I think it's a mental health issue anyway that we're creating in children, because we're teaching them to be disassociated from their bodies. And once you say what we've said with gender, replacement of sex with gender, is we've changed the biological to the cultural. In our societal definition of what men and women are, we are now cultural, we're not biological. And what that means is that the body is now nothing. The body is irrelevant. And once you say the body is irrelevant, and thinking about children's bodies, the reality is an abstract idea, and the body is nothing. Once you say that, you can abuse the body. And they, you know, in the school's guidance, they treat the body the same as a suit of clothes. You know, if you want to socially transition, you can change your clothes. If you want to medically transition, you can change your body. So the body is treated as you know, a thing like your clothes are. You can just get a designer body, and that's what happens when you say the body is worthless, the body means nothing. The reality is in your head. The reality is not grounded in your body, and therefore we can do whatever we want to your body. It's so it's so dangerous. and inhuman. It's a dehumanizing
Well,
movement.
you've had firsthand experience. Right around the time you and I first met, you were involved with the consultation meeting, the NHS public consultation meeting with Polly Carmichael and Bernadette Wren at the Tavistock, right? Can you tell us about what their response is to this? I mean, these are
Oh, no,
practitioners,
okay.
physicians who have ostensibly an interest in safeguarding children, but it doesn't read that way altogether.
Right, okay, that was a different. I went along to the NHS. The NHS consultation meeting was in London in, I think, 2016, and that was about the service specification. And that's what's been going on now with the gender identity service. The NHS did an investigation which was due actually. It was planned. We should have got the results before Christmas. We haven't had them. But I went along and I did a campaign at the time to get everybody to respond because there was a public consultation about the service specifications specifically for the Tavistock clinic, the Child and Adolescent Gender Identity Development Service. And we had a big impact. The results of that were published by the NHS, and there was a lot of public and professional concern within, the sort of percentages of people questioning it was quite high, and I think it was the result of the campaign that I did on Facebook. Actually, it's got respond to this consultation, respond to this consultation. So that was a good result. But still, the service specification went ahead, and it wasn't changed much. And that's what is, has been looked at over the last year. Results should be coming. So that was one thing. And that meeting, I asked a question, and it was full of all the trans activist groups and older male trans activists. I think there's a huge issue here about the older male trans activists have really pushed this sort of transition and puberty blockers, saying, if I was a child now, I'd really want puberty blockers. Well, this is the group that didn't suffer gender dysphoria in childhood. Anyway, the kids, the boys who have gender dysphoria in childhood are the homosexual boys. Some heterosexual teenage boys, that's not unheard of. But for the younger children, they're the homosexuals. The heterosexual transsexuals, the autogynephiles, are the older, later transitioners. And I think there's been an awful lot of influence from these older transsexual autogynephiles who are saying, or pushing for puberty blockers, saying that's what I would have done. And they've lived a life of, full sexual and romantic relationship enjoyment, full sexual function, fertility. They've fathered children, and they are promoting this sterilization and loss of sexual function for other people's children, and they have no right to be involved in this area at all. They're not, quite apart from teenage girls and their understanding of what's going on there. Anyway, so that NHS consultation meeting in London, I asked the question, and there was sort of, clinicians, Polly Carmichael, there was, she was there actually, did meet her there. But it was also people from various adult gender clinics, the NHS. And I asked the question about detransitioners and people who regret their transition. And I was told that we don't like the word regret or detransition. We see it as another step on the gender journey. And I noticed this happening at the Tavistock. The conferences that I went to at the Tavistock would generally end with some service users or ex-service users talking. And what really struck me, if you look out for these things, the tales of past sexual abuse, I mean, these came up again and again, or past trauma, and you'd get females saying, well, I identify as a boy, I took testosterone, I had a double mastectomy, and now I'm thinking maybe I'm more non-binary, I don't identify as a man anymore. And I'm thinking, you have just done all this to your body, and that's going to have like lifetime impact. You never had to do, you never had to do that. You were always non-binary. We're all non-binary. We're all individuals when nobody is 100% feminine or 100% masculine, and and yet their acceptance of it, I thought they are already being sold this message that you cannot regret transition because it was the right thing to do at that time. And you hear, the ex-service users were saying that I don't regret it because it was the right thing at the time, and now I've changed and this is the right thing now. And I'm thinking, no, you were completely let down. You should not have had to, you should have not have been sold this myth and given this treatment that has had such a physically, just such a big impact on your life. You shouldn't have had to damage your body for this.
Well, there's been a collective effort by like your group and other women's groups that have pushed back on this, whether it's from the perspective of childhood gender transition, Fourth Wave Now, transgender trend, or Women's Place UK.
Standing for women, resistors.
Yes, and then Nick Williams' group.
They're brilliant. Fair play, Nick. In fact, Nick Williams from Fair Play came along to that meeting with me, and I've been to a lot of these things alone. It's very, very hard when you're in a room, a conference centre full of trans activists, and you're the lone voice. It's really hard. And Nick came along with me to this NHS consultation meeting. It was her first experience of going to a meeting like this, and she asked a question as well. She had a practice run with me, and Nick's done a lot on her own since. But huge admiration for Nick. She's done amazing work, and she's done amazing work for me as well. She did some amazing work for me because she's a scientist. So I tend to. We did together a report on the Stonewall Schools report. Now this was a report that produced the figure of 48% suicide or whatever. And I'm a words person, Nick's a numbers person, and she's a scientist. So I asked the questions and Nick crunched the numbers. Great team. And what we found out and what I suspected, and we compared it to their previous school report, which was in 2012, where they'd collected data on the basis of biological sex. The 2017 report, they collected data based on gender identity. And their finding of this sort of suicidal ideation stat, which has been used everywhere, I suspected that was mostly girls. And we compared, we did a very thorough, and Nick is very good at doing a proper sort of scientific study and not claiming too much and being very careful. And when we looked, we found, because they had an anomaly in their findings, which was every other survey shows that girls' mental health issues are going up. The gender gap or sex gap is widening. Girls are having sort of mental health crisis, which is increasing. And the Stonewall School report showed the opposite, that girls had stayed about the same, or it was a complete anomaly compared to other studies. And when we crunched the numbers, we found that the suicide stat was almost 100. Well, it was mostly girls, and there were girls but they were hidden because they were identifying as boys. And this is a huge issue for me, that that girls' mental health issues are being hidden by calling them trans.
And also conflated with contemporary issues of sexism, harassment, bullying that's going on within schools, society, even universities. These issues are not being addressed because it seems that there's this pushing to transgender. So we can't discuss social issues because it's transgender.
So the meeting that I really met, I met Polly Carmichael and Bernadette Wren and Sarah Davidson from the Tavistock, was a conference called Hot Topics in Child Health, which I got a report of that on the website. And that was a conference that was organised in conjunction with Gyres and Mermaids. And it was quite a good conference, actually, even though Gyres did a presentation and the sort of science about we're born with an innate gender identity and proof of that, which is non-existent. And Peter Tatchell came in, did something about transphobia, which is really out of place. But we had Thomas Steensma, who's the sort of top, really recognised researcher from the Netherlands there, and we had, there was some good stuff, and I stood up and asked a question about the rapid onset, all the girls, huge increase in girls transitioning, and I got a sort of response from Polly Carmichael on the panel, and in the break, Polly Carmichael came and actually Sarah Davies, all of them are saying, "Oh, we read your website. It's fantastic. Keep doing what you're doing. It's really important." And so they knew about me, and they knew, they were reading it and were very welcoming of it. And I over the years, I sort of built a good relationship. The conferences. In fact, mentioning the sheep studies, there was a conference, I think it was 2017, 2018, called The Science of Gender, and that one,
Oh,
Neil
yes, I
Evans,
remember that.
Yeah, Neil Evans, who did that study, spoke about it and showed us and videos of sheep, and it was incredible. Actually, that was a very good conference. There was quite a range of voices there. Some of it was awful, but it was quite a balance. And this had such a huge impact, this presentation. I mean, he actually said, this is the first time that he's heard in medicine where a drug is tested on children before it's tested on animals. Tavistock is still saying, well, even in the court case, even after that using puberty blockers is safe because they've been used for precocious puberty. Now, there's questions about that anyway, as you've mentioned about Lupron and the devastating long-term effects on this group of precocious puberty kids who are mostly girls, again. But that's never mentioned. But the fact that you're blocking a child's natural puberty, you're stopping a child going through their natural puberty, is a completely different stage of development and a completely different use of drug. And it's used for psychological issues rather than, at least precocious puberty is a sort of, physical, biological condition that does create problems, and there's an argument there, but in this case, you're treating issues in the head with physical, and at that stage of development, that you're blocking that child's puberty forever, that child will never go through puberty, because the overwhelming likelihood is they'll go straight to cross-sex hormones, which are not the right hormones for their body. They will not give them the opposite sex puberty. They will not go through puberty. These children will become adults without ever having gone through puberty. And I think psychologically and on every other level, but physically, which is beyond imagining for me. Why it's really playing God, isn't it? We'll make boys into girls medically. It's really, really playing God. Anyway, the Science of Gender, that conference, when Neil Evans said that, there was a sort of audible gasp in the room. And clinicians, there were a lot of clinicians in the audience who'd come along to learn things, and there were questions, and you could see these clinicians were genuinely worried. What do I do now? I didn't know this. And he said, "Oh, yeah, that's something to think about. That's not something that I can make a comment on. I just have to give the information." And it's sort of it was like, wow, what are we doing here? We haven't even tested this on animals first, and then we're finding that some cognitive effects are not reversed if you stop taking puberty blockers. Puberty is a window for so many parts of your development. You've got a window in puberty. If you miss it, that's it. It's over.
Well, this aside from the fact that there's zero scientific evidence of this even working, even amongst adults, let's say. I mean, where was the science based in puberty? I'm sorry, in giving cross-sex hormones? That was steeped in 1950 middle America, where women were a symptom. And therefore, if a man felt like he wanted to wear a dress, then doctors were treating that as a gender incongruity, bizarrely, but true to the times of the 1950s. And today, that kind of ideology has been almost copied and pasted, skipping, as we mentioned earlier, entirely the 70s and 80s. to think that Thatcher's England or Reagan's America was somehow more gender liberated than today, it's both true and shocking, right? So here we are with this quackery of medicine going on to treat a condition that's not even been verified in all levels. I mean, as a psychological or psychiatric condition, okay, one could argue with what social sciences actually mean in terms of verifiable truths. But on the other hand, we are treating a feeling that's completely 100% codified by the social, not by the somatic, right? So,
Mm.
if you feel like you have a stomach ache, we can localize that. We can even take it, say, a C scan of it and see, is there something in her stomach? Did this child eat a marble? But gender identity entirely rests on the social stereotype of what gender means. So it's this very strange, I refer to it as a Moebius strip, that kind of odd mathematical design that, no matter how you twist it, it goes back on itself. There's no exit. And then, in the field that you have been working for many years with children, this adds an extra layer of child protection and adults and professional adults' responsibility towards these children. Now, the Tavistock and Portman clinics got under fire with Newsnight, Maitland's, coverage of that, her actually being hand slapped about some of her comments not so long ago as well. And then the vast exit of 40 practitioners in recent time from the Tavistock. What finally turned things for the Tavistock within the public eye?
Do you know what? I think Michael Biggs, his work, I really do. One thing that I've been really pleased about with Transgender Trend is that we've attracted the best writers, and we've attracted the support of really solid people and professionals. And I think people sort of stood back for a year to sort of check that we weren't some religious bigots, and noticed that we have good analysis, and we come from a point of reality and child protection. My motivation is children. My motivation is all the odd kids, as I was, the vulnerable kids who have been totally exploited here and totally groomed, and it breaks my heart. Anyway, Michael Biggs, we were looking at the that's right, he'd invited me to speak at Oxford, and then that got cancelled because they always do. We finally met up at but we finally met I spoke at a Women's Place meeting in Oxford in, I don't know, was it 2016 or something? I met Michael there, and we were working on looking at the puberty blockers trial, because this was a key area that we'd seen, and I'd been collecting through the newspaper reports of Polly Carmichael making comments. I think it was the puberty blockers trial, result of pressure from the activist groups, started in 2011, and then the ethical, the sort of ethical view, the Health Research Authority, they had to put it through, again, ethical approval for it. So that whole process was really, really concerning to me, how they got it. That was one thing. But once they got that ethical, the permission to do it, they started in 2011. Now, Polly Carmichael, the aim was to reduce the age to age 12, and the plan and the rationale was to have puberty blockers earlier. Now, I know actually that the activist agenda is totally a sort of superficial appearance, cosmetic appearance is more important than biological function, and because then you can transition a child in stealth, and and I think there's an awful lot of political gain to have children who've been through that process. It will affect women's sports, because you can say then that, well, this particular male child has not laid down testosterone in puberty. You get a more blurred line then for all of the issues that come up later, if you've got this cohort of children who are growing up without having gone through puberty. I mean, I really think that is a big part of it. But anyway, the puberty blockers trial at the Tavistock was absolutely key to all of this, and they'd reduced the age from 16. So in before 2011, puberty blockers were seen as a sort of, I think, last resort treatment. It was for the children who had experienced gender dysphoria from early childhood, which is that's the only cohort we know anything about. There's very limited research, but that's the only cohort we know nothing about. Or, apart from Lisa Littman's study, which is fantastic, we know nothing about. We've got a lot of ideas about why, but we haven't looked at the rapid onset gender dysphoria girls and some boys as well, I think, come into that group, particularly gay boys and autistic boys come into that group. So I can see the same thing happening with boys, but it's mostly girls, and clearly for very, very different reasons, and very, very much social and cultural reasons, of these vulnerable girls going online and finding the new YouTube stars selling them this wonderful way of escaping womanhood. So puberty blockers were given at age 16. Now, by that stage, at least a child had gone through puberty, had established their fertility, but had also developed secondary sex characteristics, so were already looking like the sex they were. And I think it's that is what, and I think looking at the parents, they don't want this, there's a lot of, I'm sure there is a lot of homophobia, because we all know, don't we, those effeminate boys who are most likely to grow up to be gay. But you don't want your little boy growing up to be a sort of hulking man in a dress. You want them to be visually, I'm sure, if we're thinking about parents who are quite invested in their children in that way, I think there is a lot of that there. But so it didn't work, puberty blockers at age 16, because a lot of the appearance were, become established as male or female. So down to age 12, you're going to a stage where you can get children before the secondary sex characteristics start developing, before fertility starts developing. And very quickly, Polly Carmichael was talking in the Daily Mail in 2014 about the trial has been a success and we're continuing with it. And at some point during those first 2 years, they dropped the age from age 12 to Tanner stage 2 of puberty, which could be at age 10. So in the space of a couple of years, we got it down from 16 to 10. And that's really the only way that puberty blockers work for the activists, to sort of continue the deception for the child themselves and for everybody. And so we were looking at this and sort of collating the evidence, and Michael Biggs went and researched and found this an internal report of children of this first cohort on puberty blockers after a year, and found really, really concerning results. So, for example, there's no benefit. There was in fact, worse outcomes, particularly for girls. But the bigger one was that on the child behaviour checklist, there was a significant increase in children ticking, I feel more like wanting to kill myself. Huge. I mean, it wasn't published. It wasn't. So Michael wrote his research report for Transgender Trenders. It was published on Transgender Trend, and I was so grateful to him for that, because it was such an important issue. And then I had a lot of sort of background stuff, and in Newsnight broadcast it, and Michael Biggs was on Newsnight, and it came out, so that was fantastic. So that reached a bigger audience. And interestingly, I went along to a conference. Oh gosh, it was Joanna Olson Kennedy. People in the US will know Joanna Olson Kennedy, who's the sort of gender.
If a child wears barrettes, then it must
No,
be a
that's
girl. Oh, sorry, that's
no,
the
that's
other
Diane.
one.
That's
Yes,
Diane
yes, yes,
Aaron
yes,
South.
yes, yes. I confused them all. That's right.
Oh, it was like it was like an evangelical meeting of children know their gender, and
Yeah.
oh, it was just.
Yeah.
And actually, Polly Carmichael and Bernadette Wren were there on the panel, along with Jay Stewart of Gendered Intelligence and Susie Green of Mermaids. And Polly Carmichael and Bernadette Wren were good at that conference. They were very cautious, and we're in a very difficult position because they had, evangelicals around them. I mean, Joanna Olson Kennedy is the one who's saying, yes, you cut your breasts off at age 13. If you regret it later, you can always go and get another pair. She's so far extreme, and was totally supported by Susie Green and Jay Stewart. And I know, being on a panel with those people, I think Polly Carmichael and Bernadette Wren did pretty well as the voice of caution. But that was that was the meeting where I think my relationship with Polly Carmichael soured. She was very angry with me for publishing Michael Briggs's piece. And I said to her, look, I try to be very fair. I've written good stuff. When the Tavistock are good, or I feel that they've been cautious or spoken well, I always credit them. I don't want to make an enemy of I feel like credit where credit is due. If there's something that I agree with, I'll say it. But anyway,
one thing that came out of Michael's work, both with Transgender Trend, and then he went on to write a paper, was this, and it has a huge overlap with the Kira Bell case. I'm going to quote what he wrote here from his published paper. I can even link it in the description. Glasses. Okay, here we go. He says, the Tavistock Trust now boasts of winning £1.3 million to conduct research with UCL and 2 other universities into the long-term outcomes for children who use the service, including both those who go on to use physical intervention, such as hormone blockers, and those who do not. He's quoting the Tavistock, that last bit. Given the failure of GIDS and UCL to publish the comprehensive data they have been gathering for 8 years, why fund them to collect more? End quote. Now, this reminds me of what the judge noted in the Kira Bell and mother of the trans-identified child case, where the judge noted that there were not accurate or good records being kept at all. And I'm going back to Michael's piece because right in that same paragraph here, he says, this is so important for anyone who's been doing research in the social sciences. How can GIDS and UCL now objectively analyze data from the experiment when they naturally have a vested interest in justifying their longstanding policy of treating gender dysphoria with human gonadotropins, or I'm sorry, GnRHA, sorry. So what we're seeing is, first, a conflict of interest of all these organizations that are getting money from various sources to continue. There's no conflict of interest oversight. And then we're seeing a lack of records being kept, which of course can allow them to prolong the myth that theirs is working and that we're wrong, for instance.
Do you know, it's one thing I can't get my head around. They did this study. They didn't even track outcomes. I cannot believe that because it's hard to study in this area. All the research is either low quality or very low quality. It's hard to have a control group because it sort of obviously affects. So and they didn't do their absolute best to make it as robust as studies, but the fact they didn't track them, I cannot believe that this has been going on, and is this a real experiment? It is, and so shoddy in such an important area with treatment that has such, such devastating results physically, and such serious results and unknown results that we don't know the long-term outcomes for these kids. We've never done this with children before. We don't know what an impact this will have on their later lives, physically and health-wise. It's got to be harmful because we're doing something so I can't even think of the word. so wrong to children's healthy bodies. They were healthy bodies. You know, they began as healthy bodies, and we have introduced ill health.
Well, can you talk to us about what you see happening now? I mean, this is a huge win, the Kira Bell case, and you've had a huge hand in this. What is your mission now?
Okay, I'll just go back to Michael Biggs. So I just really want to credit him, because I think his dogged, persistent research was brilliant, and he's written 5 pieces for us, which we put together on a PDF. You can find it on the website. That we put it on the front page. It's a really fantastic documentation of that puberty blockers trial. It's all in there, and you read it. And I know all this stuff, but I am shocked, even me, when I read it through. I'd really recommend you go to the website, read through that document Michael Biggs has produced. I'm enormously grateful to him for doing it for us. So that leads us to the Kira Bell case. Now, Susan Evans is, I think, the real hero here. She was questioning this in 2004, and that was when the Tavistock were giving puberty blockers at age 16. She saw, and so she was the first whistleblower. She brought the case, did loads of work to get that case together. So, and then and with Mrs. A, also, you know, had to be anonymous because of a child, but incredibly brave. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So, and then Kira Bell comes along, and you know, when I started, I thought, oh, it'd be 10 years before, and then somebody will sue the NHS. I never thought it would happen this quickly. And Kira Bell comes along and says, you know, I could do it. And of course, it's a better case if you've got somebody who's been damaged by the treatment. And Kira Bell has just been an amazing, courageous young woman who has stood up and said, I made a mistake, and how hard that is. She's only 23. I don't think I'd, you know, age 23, say to the world, I was so stupid as to think I was a boy. Now, also, I think that's not Kira's fault. Kira was told everywhere she looked that she was a boy, and adults let her down. Adults everywhere, in schools, in government, in the media, everywhere online, let her down.
And for all the talk about how long the waiting lists are for trans-identified folks, she had very few interactions with any medical professionals before they started her in the process.
And nobody uncovered her, you know, troubled background and her mental health issues, really serious things. I mean, she's a lesbian. Nobody uncovered any of that, and her reasons for wanting to transition. It's. I mean, this should be a therapeutic service. Everything possible should be done to explore and discover what is the particular issue behind it for this particular child before you go anywhere near the issue of would it help to transition. It's just so it's a real abnegation of duty from the health service to do no harm. It's a scandal. It's an absolute medical scandal. I cannot think of anything that compares with this as a medical scandal, and I think this needs to, you know, one day really come out, and it will do one day. So Kira is not only has she got such courage, but she's such a brilliant spokesperson. She's so measured and calm, and she's got her head together, Kira, and she knows exactly where she's coming from. She's coming from a place of wanting to protect kids coming up behind her, and she will protect thousands and thousands. You know, eventually, I know that this is having an impact in the US already, and it has to all globally. So what she has done with her own personal mistake, you know, she's had the impacts on her in her life are significant and difficult. She's got a difficult journey herself, and yet she's done something to prevent it happening to other people, which I hope gives her a real sense of she's achieved. Oh God, she's changed the world. She's achieved something, and that helps. And she is representative of the carelessness and the arrogance of the medical profession, and what that results in if you don't take care. And we know there are so many like Kira, and she represents not a homogenous group by any means. Everybody's got their different story and their different. But there's when I started out, all the detransitioners who were speaking out were in the States, because I think the States was a little bit ahead of us in affirmation and all of that, about 5 years ahead. But there's been an absolute explosion over the last couple of years of so many detransitioners on Twitter now. They're speaking out, they're making there always were detransitioner support groups when I started out, but there are more now, and they're getting into the mainstream press. Laura Dodsworth did a really fantastic piece for the Sunday Times last year on detransitioners, really beautiful photographs and powerful women. I really feel for detransitioners that they are in a very particular place and a very particular personal journey, and we cannot claim them. No group can claim, they're not a homogenous group. We have to be very careful to allow, it's almost like watchful waiting for detransitioners. We cannot sort of claim them for our own cause. We have to be really, really respectful of this group and the courage that they have in speaking out and speaking their story to the world, because they know they'll be attacked by trans activists. They're not part of the narrative, and so that the people, the activists don't want them to exist and don't want them to speak. So their courage is enormous. But of course, Kira, especially for taking on this case, and she did it. And we not only, because the evidence was so clear, all the evidence was presented in court, and the Tavistock don't have any. It's absolutely as simple as that. They don't have the evidence to support what they're doing. And the case rested on evidence. It didn't rest on ideology. It didn't rest on human rights. It didn't rest on the right to an identity. It didn't rest on anything except the hard facts, medical evidence. And the court, when you looked at all the witness statements from both sides, on paper, it was clear. But still, there was an issue that children over the age of 16 are presumed to be able to have informed consent. But we even got the 16 and 17-year-olds that they should also be application made to court. And I couldn't. I didn't dare hope for a total win. I actually just, after the 2-day hearing, I tried to forget about it, because you just never know these days, do you, how things are going to go. Even though it's so clear in court, it was I didn't dare go there. So when the result came out, it was I'm still processing it. I'm still processing the enormity of it and the enormity of the victory. But the other thing is, the other victory for me is that I intervened in the case and did it from the point of the cultural aspect, which is my area. And I think on the issue of informed consent, it's important to know the cultural influences and the information that children arrive at the clinic with, and therefore are they then informed of other things, which they're not. So, for example, girls arrive at that clinic genuinely believing they're boys, because of all the cultural influences online, at school, everywhere. And the Tavistock doesn't do anything to tell them there are other ways of understanding yourself or other ways of conceptualizing those feelings other than gender identity. So the Tavistock operates within the same ideology as these girls have been indoctrinated into. And therefore, the girls are not, there's no way that any child is fully informed. But I focused on the sort of rapid onset girls group but not just girls, the vulnerable children in that group, and included research about girls' mental health and girls growing up in society. Particular pressures on girls that are different to boys, and and the messages all children are getting now, and how those have added to the activist message, and etc. So I think the evidence we had to produce our full witness statements. I don't know if this all, because first of all, it was like a 6,000 words piece, which my brilliant legal team cut down to 4 points and applied to intervene. And then we got a directive from the judges saying they wanted the full witness statement and the full evidence bundle. And this was, there was a bit of a deadline. That we had 2 really hot sunny weeks in August where the rest of you, I think, were on the beach, and I was sitting here 24/7 doing this job. So we had a deadline. We met it. We got the deadline, and it was me and my legal team sort of, me writing it, then putting it into sort of a legal, sort of document. We got the deadline. It really was 24/7 work. Stonewall and Mermaids also applied to intervene, and the judge gave them the same directive. All 3 of us had to do the same thing. They missed the deadline. Susie Green was on holiday. They asked for a second deadline and missed that. And they're 2 big organisations, highly funded, lots of employees. I'm one person on my own doing this, and with no funding. I care about the kids, I advocate for, which is all the vulnerable kids, the gay and lesbian kids, the autistic kids, the ones from care homes, the ones with mental health issues. And I felt my role was, apart from being an advocacy group for Kira, it was like I was advocating for all of those kids, and that was my role, and I had to get into court to defend them. And Stonewall and Mermaids say that these kids are more likely to commit suicide if they don't get puberty blockers. They couldn't even get their act together to get into court and defend those kids, even though for them, according to their narrative, it's that important. And I think that's an absolute disgrace. And the evidence they eventually presented, which wasn't finished even then, was irrelevant to the case, or it just repeated evidence that the court was already before the court. So another of my jobs was to read through the extensive evidence from our side to make sure I wasn't repeating any of it, because you have to bring something completely new. And to me, that is it's hugely significant that it shows that one side has evidence and the other doesn't, because the Stonewall and Mermaids witness statements were all the usual emotional blackmail. These kids get bullied, it's hate crime, it's a human right to have an identity, and at every point that the judge comes in and says, well, that's not relevant to this case, that's a human rights issue, that's a different case. They didn't answer the question. They didn't even take enough care to answer the question. They didn't take enough care to get it in on time. And again, it's that arrogance that they've never been really held to account. They've never had to produce the evidence. They've produced their own flawed reports and said that's evidence, but they have never ever had to produce that evidence, and then that they expect to get what they wanted. But I felt like I was seeing on Twitter people saying, "Oh, the judges, it's transphobic. They're not letting in the trans groups," and the reality is that the court bent over backwards to let them in, but they didn't answer the question. So I think so. That to me says, well, why aren't there resignations? Why isn't Nancy Kelly resigning? Why isn't Susie Green resigning? They failed those kids. They failed the kids they advocate for because they don't have the evidence for what they're saying. Why are they in schools? Why isn't the transgender trend guidance in every school?
Right.
Which this really makes me laugh, because I think they thought they'd get rid of me very quickly. In fact, Stonewall have run a campaign consistently since that schools guidance was published. It's on a blog, it's on the website. They have written to local authorities, telling them not to use the guidance. They have heard a parent told me the Sex Education Forum won't use transgender trend because we're in breach of the Equality Act. Who told you that? Stonewall. Stonewall have, and that statement of theirs saying that this transgender trend in schools back is deeply damaging has been repeated again and again to justify. That statement is in a brochure of the Tate Gallery in London. It was a gendered intelligence project about gender, and there's a whole section on hate groups. And I think they don't mention transgender trend by name, but they link to that statement of Stonewall's. So everybody can say transgender trend is a anti-trans hate group linked to Stonewall's statement saying that our schools guidance is deeply damaging, and that's their proof. So it's been used, but Stonewall have done everything they can behind the scenes to stop transgender trend schools guidance getting into schools. And what really, really makes me amused is that schools are using it. There's nothing Stonewall can do about it. So if I feel a bit overwhelmed about things, and all I have to think is, well, a school somewhere in the UK is using the guidance and finding it useful, and nobody can do anything about that. The other big win, so Kira's win is, I can't tell you how that changes everything. The other win this year, because my two areas are health and education, that's health. Education, we've got the new Department for Education in the UK issued a statement about basically not teaching born in the wrong body in schools and not using advocacy groups that do so. Now, I do a lot of work behind the scenes, and that was that's my guidance, and that is now going into schools. And the next stage of that is to ensure that that guidance becomes statutory, and we've got a lot of work to do with the Department for Education because they still link to Stonewall, having said that those advocacy groups who promote that shouldn't be going into schools. They actually have a link, this is on their sex and relationships education guidance, to Stonewall, who are the sort of worst culprits in that area. So we've got a lot of work to do, but I see, when I look back over this 5 years of doing transgender trend, I think, well, we've won. We've got the CAS. We've got now a major review of the Tavistock GIDS, which is led by Hilary Cass, and I'm a stakeholder in that. And that's what I wanted right from the start. When at the end of this year, I was, I had 5 aims to begin with, and I'm ticking them all off this year. So it feels like this is the year we won, and from now on, I think your question was about moving forward. We have an awful lot of damage to undo, but I think we're going into a different phase. I think we've got the big ones. We've certainly got the first steps in education. We've got a lot further to go. We've still got the Equality and Human Rights Commission national guidance due to come out at some point. So we've still got a lot of work to do. I think one of the things I'm most proud of, actually, of what we've done is, apart from the schools materials, is the publication of My Body Is Me by Rachel Rooney and Jessica Alberg. And that book, we were working on this for quite a while. What can we, in fact, Jessica Alberg and I were working on it. And then Rachel Rooney appears and produces the perfect poem, the perfect book. And the message says it all, My Body Is Me. And it's a book for primary years, sort of early years primary years, because it starts there. And we wanted to produce an alternative to all of it. I counted, I think, 38 trans books for early years primary in the UK. And it is really, it's absolutely flown, this book. It's a brand. It's like children absolutely love it. The message is so simple. And it's, again, that's something that's had a huge impact. And for us, we are working on producing more resources. We've got so many projects in development at the moment of alternative resources, and they're resources that are for slightly older kids about sex and gender, that will work for autistic kids, and that's the group that I'm really, really concerned about, autistic kids, and I'm really, really concerned about children in care. So that and really sort of children from very vulnerable backgrounds. So we've got resources in, and I think it's going to be I feel like for the past 5 years I've been in a fight. It's been a really dirty fight. It's been a David and Goliath fight, and it's taken a lot. But now I think we're entering a different phase where we consolidate on our wins. We've got a lot of damage to undo, but we have the essential victories behind us, and now we build on them. So hopefully for me, it's going to be a little bit more sort of enjoy. I have enjoyed it, actually. I always feel like, when I feel really, really stressed and I'm being harassed and bullied, which is just constant, but if I wasn't doing this, I'd feel worse, because I would see what was going on and I would feel powerless to do anything. So I think I also come back to, I'd rather be doing something about it than not, but yes, I hope for me it's going to be a little bit more of a fight's over, and now we get on in just producing the resources that are really needed to balance and take the place of all this very harmful stuff that's going into schools.
I was just on Twitter and I saw a tweet that was put out just a little bit ago by someone whose work I really like in certain areas. And she has a thread about a fundraiser to produce 10 kids' books for LGBT issues. And she goes through the list of what's covered in this proposal for these books: a protagonist with cerebral palsy who dreams of swimming. There's a trans dragon, in parentheses, trans dragons are dragons. And I'm thinking, well, so much of the battle is won, but there's a lot of this that has been dumbed down even by people like her, who was an Oxbridge professor not so long ago, and I think might still be, although that's no longer in her bio. What is the link here between academia pumping this up? I mean, anyone who's been on the scene for half a day sees it very quickly, that there are trans activists in government and public policy machines. They've started NGOs left, right, and center. They've even started things that you can't even dream of. I think they've personally, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think part of the linguistic hopscotch has been on purpose to keep us snapping on our feet. Like we can't deflect it quickly enough. It's like Tron versus Battlestar Galactica versus Star Wars. They are throwing out these rays of nonsense at us, and it's coming. A lot of it, like a massive amount of it, is coming from academia. So no matter what you do on the ground, we're screwed as long as these academicians like Sally Hines are producing stuff about, agender ice cream mode.
Do you know what? I think I feel like I've spent the last 5 years spinning 100 plates while playing whack-a-mole. And that's why you get so overwhelmed. And I think this issue is causing mental health problems amongst women who can see what's going on. And I think it will with this generation of children as well. But the academia, it was so fantastic to see Dr. Kathleen Stock being awarded an OBE for her services to higher education. To me, I think we don't expect anything anymore, do we again, when there's a rapist in a woman's prison, you just think, well, that's, can't get much more extreme than that. Like, life is just unreal, and we can, we know how the female sex is being erased, and we're called bigots for challenging that, and I think it's got enormous existential and psychological effects on women. And this, for me, that when I saw the news about Kathleen Stock, it felt like a restoration of faith that there is justice and there is fairness. And she is a symbol for all of us women who are speaking out on this issue. And she has been given this award, this honour, and that would do. I think that will have an enormous impact on women's mental health. for that. There are some fantastic women speaking up in academia, and Kathleen Stock produced this brilliant report of all the mad language that's being used in universities, and this is another area of, so actually for me, I've worked with, my area has been sort of children and adolescents, but I've always been really concerned about the sort of 17-year-olds who go straight to the adult clinic, and sort of 17 to 25-year-olds. So they're the kids who, they're young adults, they're off to university. We know what that's like. I started smoking at university. You start doing things because you again, you're desperate to find your tribe, your group, you're fit in, you're vulnerable, you're away from home for the first time, you're incredibly vulnerable age group, and you completely slip through the net in terms of treatment, because you go to an adult clinic, you're affirmed, you're sent on your way with your hormones, and the universities are full of queer theory and identity politics. So you've got, and for girls now, in talking about feminism, you've got liberal feminism is, sort of sex work is empowering. It's not feminism, it's identity politics. They center trans women are women. It's like if you critique the sex industry, you're horophobic. And when we're talking about that development of sexualities, sex workers, to Stonewall are supporting sex workers now. It's almost like that's a particular sexuality. And it all goes into kink, but you can't kink shame anybody. You must accept anybody's sexual practice. You're not allowed to have any judgment or your own point of view about what might be, you've got to accept anything, any fetish, any kink, any, so what girls go into, having not been taught about much about, maybe they're taught about the suffragettes, but they're not really taught about any real feminist theories in schools. Then they go into universities, and the feminist societies are all really queer and identity politics societies. They're not feminism. And so that girls are let down at every point. They're being led to believe that and this is why I think you're getting so many young women supporting the trans movement. They have really been indoctrinated into this right from the start, and I think girls are, teenagers are very concerned with social justice issues. It's a really big deal when you're a teenager and you're idealistic and you want to support a cause. And then when you get to university, it becomes more political. And I thought, when I was working on the No More Page 3 campaign, and I worked with those women, that group of women, for 2.5 years, we were really good mates. We loved each other. We had a great time. And then I put out my first piece about. I published my first piece because I was free of the campaign. I could write what I wanted, and there was a huge. I was dropped. Basically, I was dropped. And it was enormously this was my gang, and it was enormously hurtful. It took me a long time to get over it. I still, I still see them getting together now, and it's hurtful. And I thought at the time that if it's this difficult for me, an older woman, to be ostracized from her gang, from her tribe, teenage girls don't stand a chance. Girls at university don't stand a chance, because that is the most important thing at that stage of life. You cannot expect a young woman to challenge this, because the risk is too great. Ostracization from the group is the end. So that's the situation we're in. I think when this generation grows up a bit, they might start questioning it. But it doesn't surprise me at all that the supporters of this are young women, because I do think that young women are particularly susceptible and also socialized to be more caring and to support and be kind. Be kind.
Well, we saw this with the attacks on J.K. Rowling and the more recent attack on Kathleen Stock. I was totally cracking up. I had no idea this was going on, because I don't live on social media, far from it. I don't have the time. I've got 2 small children, and 2020, need I say more? But someone sent me the link, and it says one of the critiques was Kathleen Stock getting an OBE is the perfect example of why I don't feel safe in academia.
Yeah.
And it's the rinse and repeat of words are murder, disagreement is murder, women are who think that gender is not a physical, somatic reality are murderers, Hitler, right wing, Christian, this and that. You've heard it all. We've all been called it. And I just thought, well, wherever you stand on, Americans won't understand this discourse about why it's controversial in the UK with the Order of the British Empire or others. But wherever you stand on that, even if you are against it in terms of accepting or not, the fact is there's nothing unsafe about accepting it. And I thought Stock's comments and her using the platform to speak more, it was brilliant, frankly. And yet women can't, there's an expression in English, and now I've forgotten it, but it's something like you can't win for losing. You know what I mean? And no matter what women like Stock or the interaction that happened about 2 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, with Kathleen Stock, Rosa Friedman, Alice Sullivan, these 3 women made huge advances by saying the most politely stated but patently true statements. And then you go to Twitter and it's the same thing all over again.
They were so brilliant, weren't they? We have such brilliant women in this country and in Scotland as well. Wales, Ireland, such brilliant women. I think some people say because the UK has been at the forefront of challenging this, and why is that? I don't know. I think we're quite down to earth, and we're quite sort of, we're a bit call a spade. We don't, but also I think it's humour. The women make me laugh so much, and it's that's really important. Some of the antiques of women in this country. I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the name of the campaign where they went to in London, the women's pond that was being changed, and they all went to the men's pond. What was that group?
Man Friday.
Absolutely brilliant. I mean, Posy Parker with her woman, adult, human, female posters, and just genius. What I mean, just the creativity and the humor, and women won't put up with it, and I feel very proud to be part of that amongst these other brilliant women. Okay, so they've got talking of academics. I really want to credit Heather Brunskill-Evans and Michelle Moore, who've done, I think, for a long time. So they started. I remember when in 2016 I took part in a conference called Thinking Differently, organised by Julia Long, and it was the first conference. So I presented about kids. Julie Bindel was speaking, Magdalene Burns was speaking, and it was, Julia Long, bless her, to put on this amazing conference, the first one that was challenging it. Meanwhile, Heather Brunskill-Evans and Michelle Moore had got Lisa Marciano, I really want to credit her as well, over from the States, and was meeting in Leicester. It was a meeting that I was supposed to go to, but I was doing this conference instead. So they came down to the conference, and they really started and have been working for years consistently to defend kids. And the hassle that those 2 women have had, I think, Heather Brunskill-Evans has lived in a constant state of being ostracised from groups, being hounded out, the Women's Equality Party, and that's a horrible way to live. It really is. It really does take a toll when you're being pushed out, when you're being, and she's consistently, so she spoke on a BBC Radio 4 programme called Moral Maze, and expressed caution about, the need for caution about kids. That got her thrown out of the Women's Equality Party. She was no platform. She was Michelle Moore has been consistently. I mean, I think her her disability publication journal defended her, but her university hasn't. So she's been in a constant state of being bullied and harassed, and the toll on women's mental health is huge. And yet these two women have kept going. They haven't stopped, and they've produced 2 groundbreaking books of edited essays. I've got a chapter in each book. But from detransitioners, from professionals, from parents, from just a range of academics, researchers. And the first one was called Transgender Children and Young People Born in Your Own Body. And the second one was called The Invention of the Transgender Child. And both of those books, they're out in paperback. I think they're online now as well. Absolutely groundbreaking. In fact, the Tavistock tried to halt publication of the second one because it contained Michael Biggs's piece. But I think those are the really key books. They're it's sort of academic publications, but they're very, very readable, and they've got a range of views. But I think those the work that those 2 women have done. Within academia for the subject of trans children has been groundbreaking. And I hope that, I think J.K. Rowling is such an amazing, amazing role model. And again, she's such a British institution. She is, I can't overstate her importance in this country. And yet she has had the courage to speak out. And every time somebody of her stature, she speaks out, and I just love her for doing so because of her role as a role model for girls. You can speak. Look, J.K. Rowling, our absolute heroine, is speaking. You can do it. And I always think every person who speaks out, who has a platform, who is loved, I'm so grateful to them, because I think girls are watching and they will learn that, because those things have a huge impact when you've been told by everybody else you can't speak. That has a huge impact when you see a loved person speak. So J.K. Rowling has just been amazing to do that. Such courage.